This program is part of American Graduate. Let's make it happen, a public media initiative made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Hello, I'm Jeff Salkin with Maryland Public Television. Welcome to the American Graduate Let's Make It Happen community conversation. To address the crucial topic of dropout prevention, we brought together a panel of leading experts on the issue, representing Baltimore City Schools, the State Department of Education, the Mayor's Office, as well as experts from academic and nonprofit institutions. In this program, you will hear from Andrew Moore, Senior Fellow at the National League of Cities Institute for Youth, Education, and Families, Dr. Jane Sundius, Director of Education and Youth Development at the Open Society Institute, Robert Murphy, Dropout Prevention Coordinator for the Maryland State Department of Education, Patricia Thomas, Site Supervisor for the Baltimore City Mayor's Office of Employment Development, Sabrina Sutton, Special Assistant, Youth and Education at the Baltimore City Mayor's Office, Dr. Bob Balfans, Co-Director and Principal Investigator at the Johns Hopkins University Everyone Graduates Center, David Beard, Education Policy Director for Advocates for Children and Youth, Dr. Betty Morgan, President of the Morgan Education Group, Sue Fothergill, Director of the Baltimore Student Attendance Campaign, Laura Ohanian, Office of Student Enrollment Choice and Transfer at the Baltimore City Public Schools, Karen Weber Indoor, Executive Director of Student Support for the Baltimore City Public Schools, and Rhonda Ulmer, Founding Director of the University for Parents. We began the discussion with Dr. Betty Morgan and a national perspective on the dropout crisis. Let's start with an overview. How big is this problem? What are the trends nationally as well as locally?
It's big. It's a huge problem, obviously. And I think the whole issue of increasing graduation and decreasing dropout rates is very complex. But at the same time, it's really very simple. We have to fix this problem. That's the simple part. The complex part is that many people have been working on this for a number of years, and while we see some modicum of success, it's not where we want it to be, and it hasn't been sustained. So I think the complexity goes to, in many places, many locales, it's a deeply rooted issue. It's within a fabric of local communities and family situations and a variety of things. But mostly, I think it comes down to expectations. Expecting our students to do well, expecting our students to get the rigor that they need in high school and then going on to graduate. I will put a frame on this in terms of just a national perspective in general ways. We have a very illustrious panel here who will fill in all of the details and have a lot of expertise. But nationally, I think the bad news is that our graduation rates peaked at 70% in 1969. And we have virtually been around 70% and in the low 70s for a number of years. There's good news, however, because just last year, and I think Bob Balfans will talk to this more and is really a national expert on this, we have, I think, inched up to a 75% average now as of 2012, and I'm hopeful that with his new report that will be forthcoming in a couple of weeks, that we will see some other improvements. So I think that is good news. But again, on the other hand, though, we have some very serious disparities between racial ethnic groups, service groups. While 94% of majority white students across America are graduating from high school or get a GED, it's 68% for Latino students. While 67% of white or majority students complete at least some college, it's 36% for Latinos and 51% for African American students. So we have some major disparities. We know we have major disparities when we look at national assessments and a whole variety of things in terms of preparation to graduate, and also serious disparities in terms of different students graduating. We also know we have disparities nationally. A lot of the dropouts are aggregated in the South part of the United States and in the southeastern region, and I think Bob will give us some more information about that. And what's really a fascinating statistic to me is that 1,500 high schools, or about 10%, account for almost half of the dropouts in America. 1,500 high schools out of about nearly 15,000 account for half of the dropouts. But the good news attached to that is the problem is localized. We know where those high schools are. We can attack the problem in that sense. We can work closely with those communities. We can know where the funding should go. I'm sure Jane's going to talk about some of this because we know that those are the high schools that present the most serious problem for American students. But this is not just a moral or a social imperative. I think a lot of people feel when we talk about dropout rate that we're looking at the sociological aspects of this. There's really a huge economic impact. For example, in Maryland, we have a total of 186 high schools. We have 24 that are the lowest performing, so about a sixth. In 2010, we lost 20,800 students who dropped out in the state of Maryland. So if only half of those students had graduated, they would have generated $153 million in increased earnings. They would have generated $108 million in increased spending to help stimulate our economy. I'm sure we could use that throughout the whole state. And I'm sure Baltimore City would be very pleased to hear that they would have generated $18 million in tax revenue. Because if they're not working, or if they are in prison, or if they are ill because they can't get proper health care or whatever is happening, they can't work. So this is actually not only a moral, social imperative, but it's also an economic imperative for our cities in Maryland, for our state. I'll end on this note that I think there are other solutions to this problem, which is that we need to look carefully, and I know many people are doing this, and there's an awful lot of high school reform going on across the country. As I've traveled the country and I've seen different communities, it seems there's a very high awareness in many communities of the fact that they need to graduate more students and get less to drop out. But we need to see more choice, especially for high school students, if students are able to choose. And we've seen this right here in this state, where choices that have been put in place have kept kids in school, have allowed them to be more motivated about going to school. We need more alternative schools and patterns. We need the kids who, the kids with the purple hair and 10 earrings who can't stand their peers, can't stand their teachers. We need to allow them the opportunity to be able to sit somewhere and finish their high school diplomas. We're seeing this happening in places. It can happen. It should happen. We also have to be monitoring the progress of students more closely, extensive use of data, so we know exactly how well kids are mastering what we're teaching them so that they have the skills to be able to graduate. A lot of personalized education. I think this will be the future with the use of technology that is now able to create independent study and personalization. So that's kind of a very complex problem.
Yeah, but I hear some
survey
good
overview.
things. I mean, I hear some numbers that are getting better, and we have a good handle on what's happening. Maybe let's spend a minute just taking a stab at it here. You mentioned the kid with all the piercings, and
No.
not necessarily that kid, but we've talked about the 10,000-foot level. Has anybody had any contact through their teaching, their organizations, with some students who might have become some of these statistics, but we were able to get them back on a better path and help them somehow become a productive member of society, give them a leg up that maybe they were walking away from?
Mm-hmm. I know that I have sort of a privileged position as a person working in a foundation that gets me to observe a lot of schools and to work with a lot of youth through my grantees. And I would say that every child who has been saved, as you will, from a dropout has been a child who said, I stayed in school because Miss Smith, the librarian, cared about me, or because my math teacher reached out to me. For so many of these children, it is about one single individual who cares, who believes they can do it, and somehow helps them find the supports and the resilience within themselves to succeed and to stay in school.
Jeff, if I could add, I think actually there also needs to be a reframing of the actual issue. We talk about high schools, and that is the place where kids drop out because legally they can. Mm-hmm. I think we really need to be focusing on elementary schools and middle schools. It needs to be a systemic movement. Because again, at 16 or 15 or 14, I've pretty much already made a decision. I'm now just waiting for the legal time for me to say I'm out of here, or someone to help me on my way out of here. To add to Jane's point, Maryland Public Schools across the state are doing innovative things. There are graduation coaches in some local school systems. There are alternatives. Kids are getting podcasts, their instruction, some of those who are struggling. So there are a lot of innovative things that are happening in Maryland Public Schools.
And I completely agree with Robert's point. I mean, from the perspective of the Baltimore Student Attendance Campaign, we see issues start very early on, even as early as pre-K and K, where families present with life circumstances that make it really clear that there's other things happening. And yet the dropout happens in high school, but there's things going on all along the way that indicate that there's a family or a student in need, that with the right supports and the right engagement and the caring person, it can really make a big difference for that family and that student. And attendance and a child's showing up daily at school can be a really strong indicator as to whether or not that student is on a path to success or on a path to dropout as early as kindergarten.
We talk about the kid who in middle school is already, the course is set, not getting school for whatever reason. But clearly there's also people in high school who have to leave school because they need to be a breadwinner. Whatever the situation is, the urgency of the family economic situation takes over. Any idea, maybe Bob, how big a component of the problem that is?
That's really a key thing that we found to really make sure the kid gets that right adult working with them to solve their problem, is we have to be smart about how to get the right supports to the right kids at the right time, which means we need to know something about the dimensions of the problem. And so there's really about 4 groups of kids. There's, as you talk about, life events kids, something outside of school. They have to work to support their family. They get involved in the juvenile justice system. They get pregnant. Essentially, you have to solve that life event and help them graduate, given their life circumstances. There's another group of kids that almost make it and then stop seeing the point. They just determine that their life course will be the same whether they get a diploma or not. We call them sort of fade-outs. And for those kids, we need to show them that, no, you'll have a much better life if you stay in school and maybe get a community college program and become a construction manager and not just a construction journeyman at the lowest level where you could start. There's another group of kids, if we're honest, are kids we push out of school because we find them problematic, either through our discipline policies or our attendance policies. And that's a different solution. That's more on the school side. And then finally, there's the kid we talked about in middle grades who's not coming to school, who's failing their classes. By the time they get to high school, they've developed non-productive responses to wanting to avoid failure, which is really about denying effort. Because if they say, like, I tried really hard and I failed, that's really scary. It's better to say it was stupid, I didn't care, I can do. So we have to organize kids into those buckets and then organize our responses against them.
What are the bigger buckets? Which ones are more easily addressed?
I think they're all addressed. It's just we have to be smart about it. I mean, it's usually about 10 to 15% of kids are in that life events. It's about the same for the fade-outs. And then really the biggest bucket is the kids that's just not succeeding in school, and the school's not designed to help them succeed.
I monitor dropout data throughout the state, and what you see annually since about 2006 is about a 20 to 30% jump in those kids who are dropping out because of employment. They have to take care of their family. Along the same lines, around 2007 when we had the real big financial meltdown, it used to be our students dropped out because of a lack of interest. There's another withdrawal code, which is 50, which is whereabouts unknown. Well, I've seen a spike in whereabouts unknown and employment, whereas interest stays pretty consistent. But the spike in whereabouts unknown has been probably about 30%, and the jump from employment has been about 30%. So when we've had this economic downturn, we've had a lot of kids who've come up missing, and also those kids who are leaving because they need to go work.
We have a lot of Baltimore City school representatives. Things the same, different at all?
Well, and I'm with the Futures Works program, which is a dropout prevention program. And one of the things that we can definitely say that we've seen in the years we've been working with Baltimore City Public Schools is that the hardest to serve students, you can bring them back in. They can be successful. We have been very successful with working with those students. It is employment, it is economic. You have to take a holistic approach when you're working with those students. It's not all about just coming to school and sitting in a classroom. You have to know what's going on when they go home, because that's what they have to deal with. And in some cases, they are the person who's taking care of everything. So when you think of a scale of 1 to 4 and saying at risk, our program has been very successful working with the 3s and the 4s. And it's basically taken a one-on-one relationship with those kids and helping to turn things around.
I think the key, though, is identification. And in some urban schools, it's very hard to identify which populations fall into which buckets. And the reason for that is that there are so many pressures on the urban school principal for student achievement and student success. I was speaking earlier to Bob Belfance and saying, if you have a 95% attendance rate, you've met your mark, and now you're going to focus on something different. But what about that 5% of students who are falling through the cracks, and no one really has identified what the problems are? It's not that hard to do if you take the look, but it's really encouraging. And one of the things that's happening in Baltimore City schools is that we're beginning to encourage schools to develop the kind of school climate that will enable you to really know your students. And that's been heretofore more or less the teacher's foray. You should know your students. But the principals have to know their students too, because they're the only ones who can really take that deep dive and find the resources that those students need that will bring them back to school.
Working as I do with mayors and municipal leaders around the country on education improvement, that we need to keep our conversation going and perhaps push further on widening the frame or differentiating the frame here, because we and mayors around the country see the dropout issue as a community issue, not a schools issue. The implications are felt throughout the community. Mayors are held responsible for reconnecting young people with education, regardless of whether they have any administrative role over the school system. And the way government is organized here in Baltimore with the Mayor's Office of Employment Development, for instance, they play a key role. So that's one point that I hope our conversation today is not limited to what happens inside school buildings, but also what happens in and around schools and in the neighborhoods and in city governments and so forth. The other point is that we can talk about the reasons young people drop out, and we can, and as many people around the table have done, launch efforts to prevent dropout, but it's equally important to add a word to our lexicon, and that is dropout recovery. There are thousands of young people in Baltimore, across the state of Maryland, and across the country, as Betty pointed out, who have already dropped out, who need a pathway back into school and to be launched toward a pathway toward post-secondary certification and a chance to succeed in the labor market and indeed as citizens of the country. So if we only concentrate our efforts on prevention to the exclusion of recovery, we're really not going to be tackling the full problem.
Okay, Ms. Allberg wanted to get in. Why don't we do that and then come back to you?
What I found, Jeff, at University for Parents is that really dropout starts at home. Dropout prevention starts at home. And so what we like to do is really work with the parents to help their children be successful in school. And we see that, you know, one thing we've noticed when we're working with low-income communities and schools is that if parents are really not able to meet the basic needs of their children, provide them with, you know, housing and food and medical care, then their challenge is really trying to provide those needs for their children. And if they're not able to do that, they're really not focusing on helping their children be successful in school. So what we do is really educate them and help them to see that, connect them with the different tools and resources to help them to be successful. So with parenting, it's very, very important because they are the foundation of the family and of that community that we speak about here. And so it's crucial that we really seek with helping the entire family be successful.
Laura?
I just wanted to take a second and talk about the dropout recovery, because I actually think that is very important, too. And all of the indicators that we've talked about, and I'm going to go back to Dr. Morgan, and you mentioned choice. So what's important from City Schools' perspective is not only to recover the students, because we have the Great Kids Come Back campaign. We're working regularly to try to bring dropouts back to school. But when you bring a dropout back to school, you have to take the time to know why they dropped out, what were the factors that led to it, and how can you support them. And the choice process has to come in to play, because putting them back at the same place where they didn't find success is not going to solve the issue, unless the indicator is, of course, outside in the community, and we can help them. But we do that regularly. We have those conversations with kids. We need to have them more, obviously, but we do it on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and we don't bring them back to the place where they were not meeting success. And we talk to them about what the reasons they drop out. And in getting down to knowing the kids and knowing the trigger and the issues that led to that dropout is one of the most important factors, and making sure you match them and help them find a school that has flexible scheduling, a school that, I mean, a lot of these kids are adults. So to put them in a high school with 14-year-olds in an environment where they're not treated like adults, when they're at home taking care of an entire family, you're not going to meet success. They have to be talked to in a different way. They have to be treated in a different way. They need to have a different set of structures. So they need a different environment a lot of the time. And so that it's not just the recovery, it's not just getting to know it, but it's also making sure you have the places for them to go.
That's right. Do they need a different curriculum too, in any way?
Well, oftentimes they do. And one of the things that is critical is to find out where they stand when they come in. Because the assumption is that they are students who have struggled and therefore they haven't met with academic success. But we know, as has been outlined, that that's not always what the case is. So the most important thing is to see where they are and take them from where they are to the steps they need that are missing, as opposed to making assumptions and starting them out with remediation and remedial classes that will take far too long for them to complete in order for them to continue to do the things they need to do in their lives, such as employment.
At the same time, we also need the flexibility, even for kids that are still in school all across the line, and especially as they transition into new grades, seeing where they're at. I think one of the problems is a kid may not be up to speed at 5th grade. Maybe they're at a 3rd grade level, but they're still being taught all this 5th grade curriculum without really addressing some of the underlying problems. So I think we need to figure out a way in the curriculum and the way we train teachers and the supports that we give teachers to be able to work with those students, because we know we have them all along the spectrum, and if we don't address it early, they'll keep falling further and further behind. Advocates for Children and Youth focused on a lot of things, but one of them is resources. Do we have the right resources, the funding that's needed to really focus on this when there's so many competing needs for the money? I mean, it depends who you talk to, I guess. But I think some of it is about reorganizing existing resources and using the resources we have better. We know that we're in strained times, and we're likely to be in strained times for a while. So, of course, we can use additional resources always. But there are different ways we can use even the very basic per pupil funding to help provide for alternatives and alternate schedules and a different way of looking at education, but also leveraging our community partners that are out there. I think some schools are doing that well, particularly in Baltimore City, but in other jurisdictions it's not really being done.
To add on to Andy's point regarding really making sure that community is aware of these problems. A lot of times young people are in these communities, they live in these communities, they're in the communities a lot more than they are in the schools. And so making sure that neighborhoods are aware, the faith-based institutions are aware of not only the problems, but the type of resolve that we can add to letting young people know how important it is to be in school, how important it is when you graduate, the opportunities that you have. And in the mayor's office, that's one thing that we know that we're able to do. The mayor could use it as a message point. The mayor can, and her neighborhood liaisons can make sure that in the neighborhoods, we're clear that there is an issue about dropout, but there are some resolutions. And so I think, too, making sure that it is going to the grassroots, making sure that they know that this is a problem and there are ways that we can help our young people get out of it.
The problem's probably contagious a little bit. You know, if a couple of kids in the neighborhood decide to drop out, well, a few more might see that as a valid choice. But if a couple of kids decide to either go back after dropping out or stay in the first place, that hopefully could be contagious too.
Well, Jeff, to this point that Laura mentioned about the Great Kids Come Back campaign, what you find is that once one of the young people hear about that, then they said that I brought my friend with me because this is a great opportunity. And so I do think that peer pressure does play a role, but a lot of times we see peer pressure as a negative. Sometimes peer pressure is positive because when they know that there's an opportunity, then they will talk to their friends and they'll take advantage of the opportunity as well. It's
actually quite exciting whenever we have a Great Kids Come Back event. For weeks after, we have kids coming back in with friends and we're like, oh my, where are all these kids? They just know all the kids, and we're constantly reminding the kids, if you know anybody who needs to find a different school, who's looking, because kids think of themselves as dropouts well before the district identifies them as dropouts. I mean, I think they know pretty clearly that they're not engaged. They know that they're not interested in what's going on, and they're ready for a change. So we ask the kids to talk to each other, and we get them back. I mean, Sabrina's been there with me at some of the events where they bring, and also the younger siblings. We have one of the targeted campaigns we do is to target the elementary schools and make sure they know we're doing these events. And the younger siblings will bring their older siblings back. They'll be like, oh, he's sitting at home doing nothing. I'm going to make him come to school. It's exciting to get the community involved and their friends.
I think there is something that is important to recognize at the federal level. And it may seem counterintuitive, but it connects very much to what everybody has been talking about. We need to be able to give schools the space and reward those that really do reach out and pull kids in and really do retain their children and really pay attention to attendance. While the federal accountability structure, No Child Left Behind, has been very helpful in identifying subgroups of children who haven't been achieving at the levels we want, it has created a real tendency for schools to have to focus with laser focus on a couple of measures, test scores. And when schools do that, because the penalties for not reaching those are quite high for schools, it takes away from their ability sometimes to really focus on these other issues. And so from the federal perspective, I think what is important is to allow schools to show how they pull kids in, how they keep them, and reward them for that as well as test improvement.
But I would have to say that even though I think the federal government can aid this or counteract it or whatever, it really is a state problem. And when you look across America, there are such disparities among the states. But what's interesting for Maryland is, and I think this is an issue to really be looked at, and I think our state really needs to consider policies as well as standards that need to be put in place so that it can support all of the school systems. Because in the end, I think it's a more efficient way to go if you're a state. I mean, we fall in line in school systems with all of the new standards and all of the new laws and the things that are added to the Code of Maryland like clockwork after the session's over. Jeff knows this because he's talked about it a lot on air. But what about dropouts and what about graduation rates? Maryland is strange in that if you look nationally, and by the way, these data come from an organization called the Alliance for Excellent Education. Bob knows them well and works closely with them. We have the highest graduation rates in the country and the lowest graduation rates in the country in this state. That is a real anomaly. I don't know of any other states that have that, Bob. You may know of some others.
So what does that mean?
It means that we're not consistent, our standards are not consistent, that perhaps we need some policies at the state level. And I understand it's an individual student, it's a family, it's a local community issue, but I think the state can greatly help us in this area.
Also, though, that we are seeing in Maryland and other places the increasing concentration of poverty and difficulties for students. I mean, this gets back to the point, well, it is about what happens in the classroom. Children can't learn if they're couch surfing, which is what we have this euphemism called unaccompanied children, and it means that they're basically on their own. We have a growing number of those. Children who are hungry, children who have disabilities caused by lead or other things in the environment. It is a complicated problem, but this is very obvious that as the child poverty rate goes up in a community, the schools are going to suffer, and it gets to the point where, unless we can deconcentrate that a little bit, it's almost impossible for a school to match the graduation rates of more affluent communities.
And if I could jump in, Jeff, there actually is a state standard for dropout. There's a cohort dropout standard, and there's also an annual standard. Included in every public school system's master plan is something around dropout prevention and recovery and alternative programs. Actually, last year, the Maryland General Assembly created Senate Bill 362, which is essentially raising the age of compulsory attendance in the state. There are certain things that are triggered in that bill, which would say very clearly that kids can drop out until 17, I believe, in 2016 or 15, and then 18 in 2017. Public school systems in Maryland are required to provide the state of Maryland Department of Education with plans on how we're going to manage these kids who actually will be with us now. So
I forgot about that. So they passed that bill.
The bill was passed.
You're not going to be allowed to drop out.
No, you're not going to be allowed to drop out. It kicks in. It kicks in a few
problem
years.
solved, right?
And Advocates for Children and Youth is really taking a look at that. We recognize and supported the bill and want kids in school till 18, but we've really recognized that it's just not all of a sudden going to happen. And even these plans that come out this year, I think, are probably going to have to be looked at and going to see how we can really improve the rates. We're going to have a comprehensive strategy that looks at everything from, attendance in the early years and early warning systems all the way through what are the types of alternatives that we're providing to our high schoolers. I mean, if we really want every kid to stay in school and if we really want every kid to get to graduation, a lot of things are going to happen besides just this bill being passed.
And can I add also, Jeff, last year we created the Dropout Resource Guide. It's posted to the Maryland State Department of Education's website. It talks very clearly about the things that are working, research-based strategies. It also gives you a list of what local school systems are doing. We are now working with the Mid-Atlantic Regional Educational Laboratory to evaluate Maryland programs, and that actually, the document will be released, I think, sometime this year, hopefully sometimes around March or April. So we're also evaluating Maryland programs. Next year, there also will be an alternative standards. We already developed alternative standards for alternative schools or alternative programs, but now we're also looking at alternative standards as it relates to program efficacy. How do we get kids to graduate? How do we move kids from alternative programs and struggling in alternative programs to actually completing alternative programs? So we're moving towards documents and research that will help us move forward.
Sue wanted to get in, and then Bob.
So on the standards piece, I think that it's very exciting that we've moved the age from 16 to 18, but dropouts is an end-of-the-life event, right? It's a decision that you make after you've been in school for some amount of time. Currently 16, presumably going forward it'll be 18. But the disengagement that leads to dropout happens well before a child actually makes that decision or the family allows that decision to happen. And the concern I have about making the standard dropout, either raising or lowering your dropout rate, is that you're measuring what happens at the end and not necessarily measuring or using indicators that allow you to measure that disengagement before the dropout. And so it's concerning to me that in the reauthorization or under the waiver from No Child Left Behind that the state made a decision to remove attendance as an annual measurable objective. So it was an annual measurable objective. Maryland was one of the few states in the country that saw attendance as a powerful enough indicator under No Child Left Behind that it chose to measure the attendance rate of 1st through 8th graders. But in the waiver process, they took that measure out. And it's concerning to me now because that's no longer an annual measurable objective. And when the state made that change in 2003, attendance rates in middle school increased precipitously. In Baltimore City alone, our chronic absence rate decreased from 33% to 16%. So it makes a difference if the state says that this is something that we're going to measure you on. Principals pay attention, districts pay attention, and I really believe that we've dropped the ball by removing this as an indicator that we want to hold schools accountable for. And I'd like to see it put back.
To tie some of these points together, I think that we're actually doing two things backwards to solve this problem, that if we turn around, we can really make a big dent. The first is that if we're honest, we take in every district, every neighborhood for themselves approach to getting kids through school. And then we held them accountable from sort of afar. Instead of saying, who has the greatest needs, who has the greatest challenges, let's mobilize our resources there to make sure they have a chance to succeed. And then the second thing is that we focus too much on sort of last-ditch retention efforts. Kids don't meet standards, let's retain them in grade, and don't put the money in upfront prevention. And the thing about resources we don't recognize is that when we retain a kid in 9th grade, their odds of graduating at best are 1 in 4. We're investing $10,000 in a strategy that only pays off at best 25% of the time, but it's seen as free money because we just fund kids per pupil, not where they're at. And from a school, if we had the greatest summer program that cost $1,000 to put this kid back on track, we would say that's unaffordable. We can't even imagine finding money to pay for that in these current circumstances. But we will spend $10,000 next year to tell the kid do the same thing under the same circumstances, because our funding flows just are not done in a logical way.
Does everybody approach it that way? Is that universal, state by state?
Nationally, we retained 240,000 kids in 9th grade last year. $2.4 billion was spent on that, and it has a 25% success rate.
So I'm hearing we're not doing enough with the early warning stuff, whether it's attendance or people falling behind.
True. And that's part of why I think it is a state issue, but it is also a federal issue. I mean, they don't provide the majority of education, but when No Child Left Behind came around and the achievement measures that the federal government put into place became the law of the land, schools changed their practice remarkably. And the funding follows that. So I think Bob is right in that we really do need to reward schools for doing the stuff in the early grades and the early signs of disengagement, and find a way to measure that and reward them so they can spend the time to do it. Absolutely. And again, I think the other issue that we have to be honest about is that there are very, very large racial disparities. And while some of this is happenstance, I guess, the reality is that there is racial bias coming into play here. And I think we all have to begin to be kind of honest about it. If you look at the figures, children of color tend to go to schools that are less well-resourced, have much lower outcomes. They also tend to get suspended more than white children, even for the same offenses. This is not to say that anybody is outwardly prejudiced and says, oh, Robert, you're African American, so I'm going to suspend you. That's not what happens. It is implicit in our systems and in ourselves. And we have to begin to be honest and recognize it. There's a superintendent in Maryland, in Talbot County, Karen Salmon, who has begun to tackle this right head first in her district. And I have to really applaud her. It takes an enormous amount of courage in America to say we have a problem being fair on a racial basis, because nobody, that's the great, wonderful thing about the civil rights movement, is that nobody wants to think of themselves as a racist. We all want to be fair. And I really applaud her and suggest that others think about this part of the issue.
I was going to say, I think one of the things, and we talked about attendance, but behavior, and I'm glad Jane brought it up. I actually wrote it in my notes. Behavior is a big issue as well. I mean, you're talking about suspensions essentially for the major reasons are disrespect and subordination, disruptive behavior, those types of things. And I was actually in a system maybe last week and was told a student was suspended because a teacher threw their paper back on their desk. And the girl said something to the extent of, don't throw paper at me, or you can't throw paper at me, or something like that. And the child was suspended for disrespect. The problem with disrespect and those types of discipline codes is that it is subjective. Disrespect to you means something totally different than it means to me, than it means to her, than it means to her. But we've got kids who are being sanctioned in our state for reasons that really aren't necessarily that are really subjective and based upon the individual. So we've got that, to me, is one of the larger issues that we face, because as Jane talked about, the issues with disparities as it relates to suspensions, and primarily our African American students are the ones who are being suspended. They're also the ones who are dropping out. They're also the ones who are lowest performing. They're also the ones who may not be coming to school. So you kind of see this causal effect of suspensions and overall treatment. I mean, we went around the state and talked to some African American males, and the conversation was very clear. The boy said, nobody smiles at us. They treat us like they don't want us here. We are disrespected. No one cares about us. I mean, the same stuff you hear from dropouts, but it was heartfelt. And we went all over the state. We went to the shore, we went to Southern, we went to Central, we went to Western, and we heard the same story. And so this, to Jane's point, this experience is an experience that certainly not only black kids are feeling, but it is a very real experience for African American students.
Part of that's always been for African American males, relative lack of role models in the school system. More African American male teachers needed. Is that the case?
Go ahead.
I think really that's somewhat of a different issue. Yes, it'd be lovely to have more males in general in the school systems as teachers.
Well, somebody might look at these kids differently
but I think it
to
does.
Robert's point, the person looking at them looks just like them.
Yes, but what Robert is saying, that for African American boys, we don't intend to, but we treat them differently. In the media, for example, this is so deeply ingrained in us. The Heinz Foundation did an audit of media and found there are almost no instances in commercials, in TV shows, where African American males were portrayed in a positive light, as fathers, as good students. Nobody in the networks intended to do that, but something deep within us needs to recognize this and to say, this is not fair. There's something in our practice that is wrong if the African American boys are getting suspended more for the subjective offenses. It's not the 2 or 3% that's weapons and guns and drugs. It's all of these soft offenses.
It's not violence. I mean, we talk about fighting, and everybody, oh my God, fighting, but fighting really is like third on our list, and it's actually roughly about 20% of the suspensions, maybe 25% of the suspensions. The majority of the suspensions are the categories that I mentioned earlier, and again, these young men, and I would actually suggest that it could be an issue of role models outside of the building and perhaps inside, but there is a different treatment, at least from these boys' perspective, that they receive, and the numbers actually back up what they say.
And there are ways of addressing the issue. I mean, we've seen this in schools around the country, even in Anne Arundel County, where first they took a look at their referrals and where this is coming from. And you can do the same with your dropout and look at when kids are dropping out, when kids are struggling. You have early warning systems that can take about 6 different risk factors, like chronic absence, like failing one grade, like being suspended. And you can literally pinpoint where things are happening, to who's happening, the type of kids that are happening. That's sort of your first step. And then your next step is creating a climate where all kids feel welcome, all kids have the same opportunities. Teachers have training on some of these sorts of things, on how to identify an issue, how to to work with kids and get the issue out, and then how to stop an issue before it gets really bad. You can do this in the classroom, and it's happening. So there are ways to combat this problem.
The other thing is that there's resonating lack of student voice in our schools, and that worked, I guess, in the 1950s. There's a big disconnect with what's necessary in this millennium. Students have to be a part of their own solution. If we know that some of our students, especially in high poverty areas, are part of the solution in their household, they've got to be part of the solution in the school system. We've got to hear from them. We've got to speak to them. They have to speak to us. And there are very elaborate programs that allow for student voice, whether it's through a student court program, a mediation, peer mediation program. Those things are incredibly effective. But just having administrators and teachers understand that if an incident takes place, the first thing you must do is speak to the child and find out what's going on, because you might be very surprised at what some of the things are that are going on in that student's life. And this is part of school climate that we're advocating for in Baltimore City schools. The school climate that's appropriate knows what's going on with the students, and the students are participants in their own educational process. They therefore want to come to school, and they want to finish school, because the messaging is given in the school that this is the place to be, this is what will get you success. In the old days, all parents were saying, you have to finish school, this is for your life, this is what will get you ahead. The school system, unfortunately, has to take that role at this point and say, this is where you need to be. This is what will bring you success, and we have to mean it. It can't just be said. It has to be demonstrated with caring and with positive school climates.
But I think it's important that we also involve the parents in this entire process, because at the very end of the day, the child goes home to the parent. And so parents are really, we hear it all the time, parents are their child's first teachers, parents are their child's role model. And so it's so crucial that parents expect that expectation that you are to go to school. And so they have to model that at a very young age, Head Start, pre-K, elementary school, modeling the importance of going to school and how that is going to help them to be successful in life. So really involving parents and allowing them to be at the table. And then maybe some parents don't know how to do that. And so that's why it's important that we provide them with the tools and resources and educate them on how to be involved in their child's education, because a parent that's involved in their child's education is a child that's going to be successful.
And back to making schools welcoming. And if you have a young child, the parent is bringing that child to school. Is a school a welcoming place where the parent wants to come? We're beginning to measure those variables. It's anecdotal information, but it's very useful in having discussions about how people from outside the school itself are experiencing that school. How are they greeted when they come in? How are they treated after they come in? Are they welcome there? And this information, this discussion, is having an impact on how our school climates are adjusting in Baltimore City. It's also having an impact on our actual data. Suspensions are going down. Attendance is up.
Can you track it? You see a school that's doing a good job, an elementary school maybe, that's doing a good job with this, and then follow those kids forward 6 years and see where they are.
Well, unfortunately, my job is in real time.
Yeah.
So I have to look at the current school year we're in, and I have to try to improve the schools across the district, all 204 of them. So that really is my task right now, and we're making that shift.
Can I talk about a school in Baltimore City that
Please.
has transformed its climate in remarkable ways and has seen the data to support the outcomes? And so, for example, Reginald F. Lewis, when Dr. Barney Wilson came in as the principal, one of the first things he did was really deal with the school climate in multiple ways. He met with the students one-on-one, each and every student, to connect with them, understand who they were, and also to communicate with them about where they were in their pathway towards graduation, making sure they understood the number of credits they had. The other thing he really did was embrace the vision of the school. So it's a school of business and law, yet there weren't really the programs in place to communicate the business and law is what the school was about. So he partnered with community, he partnered with people he knew in the neighborhood, and he actually built a moot courtroom in his school so that the students could try out out the practice of law. He built a bank in his building so that the students could try out the practice of business. And so he created an environment that met the needs of the students one-on-one, but also created programming and supports in the building that communicated that when they came to school, not only were they going to learn in the classroom, but they were going to learn through project-based opportunities and really allowing themselves to experience their putting their practice into.
Is that tough for the principal to do, because the principal is being graded, promoted, maybe even compensated based on the test scores?
I don't think that's tough for a principal to do, because if the students aren't in the building, then the test scores aren't going to bear fruit. And so for Dr. Wilson, when he took that school over and created this environment, the students come to school more often. He reduced chronic absenteeism by 20% in his first year there. His attendance rate for his junior and seniors are 97 and 98%, which is huge in a high school. And so the students are there every day. They want to be there. They enjoy being there. So the test scores follow because they're in the classrooms and they're learning.
Yeah, love stories like that. Where was this?
Baltimore City.
Baltimore City. He actually started a program called Lewis Loves.
Yes. Okay.
And he tells the kids they can either call him Dr. Wilson or Dad. Those are the two choices.
Yeah.
So, that personal, it's a great example, Sue.
And some of this seems soft or sort of mushy, if you will. But the fact of the matter is the best schools, whether you're talking about in affluent areas or some of the best public schools or public charters that we even have in the city, are undertaking these approaches. So we know that they work.
Yeah.
And the data follows immediately. There's no lag.
Choice, alternatives.
There's actually
very important.
There's actually good data from Chicago that shows this, that when schools do two things, they organize themselves so that the students know there's adults, a group of adults that care about them and can solve their problems. And secondly, there's a pathway from that school to an adult future. When you can organize yourself in those two themes, there's really strong data that even in the highest poverty schools, you could have safe schools, you could have schools where kids come every day, you could have schools where you don't even need security guards, and you could have schools where lots of kids succeed if you have those two driving principles and the resources, if we're honest, to back it up. And that just gets me back to my other point that Andy brought in, is that we really have got to keep driving home to the community the cost of the dropout crisis, because they've got to get off the sidelines and into the game, because they bear the cost through juvenile justice and adult justice and increased health and decreased taxation. But that's in the future. And that someone else will pay for that 10 years down the road. And we got to get them understanding that it's imperative now that every kid graduates prepared for adult success, because there is no work in the 21st century to support a family if you don't have a high school diploma, which means somebody else is going to be supporting you. And that's the community. And so they got to get off the sidelines and into the game to create more schools like that.
When you know that a school leader understands community as well that the school is in, and how important it is that that community is vested. So once they meet and the principal talks about their expectations, the community knows the young people that are in that school. And so they would call the principal and say, young man, he's outside playing in the basketball court. And that principal or that teacher that's engaged will go and find out what's going on. And so again, and I guess from the mayor's office, I'm going to really, deal from this community and neighborhood perspective. It's really important that the principals and the teachers really engage the community that that school is in, because that community understands that they have a vested interest as well, that these young people are in school and that they graduate.
And the community has to see the school as an asset.
Absolutely.
And I know that, for example, I took over a school that failed when I was a principal. And when it became a successful school, the community came to me because they saw success at their door. So it can be done either way. It can be done by bringing people in, making your school a place where everyone wants to be, or going out into the neighborhood and saying, this is who we are, and this is... But I feel like the proof is in the pudding. If I make the product such that it's undeniable, then you will come to us and you will be part of us.
I think there's another layer to the community conversation as well, and that's the layer of the public agencies and their role to play in supporting schools, because the issues that show up on the doorstep and the problems that the children present with are sometimes issues that are outside of the power of the school to solve alone. Yeah. And so, for example, we know that a number of children miss a lot of school in the early grades because of asthma, and high rates of incidences of asthma in Baltimore City, where children are missing 50 and 60 days of school because they're having asthma symptoms. And so making sure that there's really strong partnerships with agencies like the Baltimore City Department of Health or the Baltimore City Department of Housing. And then in Baltimore City right now, there's a really incredible partnership with the Baltimore City Department of Social Services, where they're partnering with the district and doing outreach with some very severely chronically absent young people and doing some early intervention works with those families. So I think that the agencies need to see themselves, and I know they do, but really being very intentional about what their role is in partnership with Baltimore City Public Schools and supporting the students and the families that are being served.
I have to brag on the Department of Health and say that Dr. Barbeau, who is the health commissioner, has appointed a medical doctor to come into Baltimore City, into my office once every week. And one of the things she's able to do is disseminate health information. And sometimes it's really that basic, getting the right information into the right hands so that people know how to deal with their health issues and know what resources are available to them. And the other thing we're beginning to do is sort of coagulate our health centers, our school-based health centers, which are incredible health resources, but they're only in 19 out of 200 schools. So we're getting schools in the neighboring area to use those health centers so that better health care is available to students in Baltimore City schools.
Yeah, several years ago, a group of mayors who particularly interested in improving services for children and youth and improving education in their cities outlined some critical features of what you might call infrastructure in a city, and paramount among those was a means of city government and schools working closely together. It means that the mayor and the superintendent are literally meeting regularly, that the mayor is playing that convening and coordinating role among the public agencies that you're talking about, Sue. And it means that the city council and the mayor and the elected school board, if there is one, are in active communication as well. So in cities where those pieces of infrastructure exist, there's better chance for progress and coordinated success. Where that's not yet in place, it's something to aspire to.
And that really helps with the climax of the school in the community, as we were talking about earlier. If I know that my school is a hub where I can get health services, I can go speak to the social worker or the school counselor, you feel that it's safe. Mm-hmm. You feel safe, you feel welcome, you want to go into the school, you want to volunteer. Mm-hmm. And I know that was one thing, a school in Anne Arundel County, the school became sort of like this hub for the community. And so, parents felt welcome. Students even felt okay to go into the school after school hours. The principal even on occasions went into the community, visiting the students and visiting their churches and going to their ball games. And, that my principal, my teacher is at, one of my events. That makes me feel loved. That makes me feel welcome. I want to go to school next week. So, you want to, like you say, change that climate, but involve everyone in the community to be a part of that.
We set expectations for kids. Mm-hmm. They're going to have a reason to meet it because they know that you care.
It's personal.
Right.
It's personal.
And you set expectations with a relationship.
Working with Baltimore City, I was very happy to hear you mention Dr. Wilson because we've been working with him for the last 3 years. And our program has worked on attendance and parent involvement. And we found the biggest thing is basically just getting the children involved. They want to be there. They want to be successful. But there are so many things on the outside that just can distract and pull away. One of the good things about the Mayor's Office of Employment Development is that we have people who are working within school and we have people working with out of school. So they have alternatives. If someone honestly just cannot deal with the structure of being in high school, then there is a youth opportunity program with Ernest Dorsey that they actually work with the kids and pick up, and they have an opportunity to earn a GED and get work skills. So there's a lot of things. We have the ACE Academy School that is also working in partnership, the Academy of Careers and College Exploration. And they have been very, very successful. So where we have people with my program working in schools with the population and making a difference in keeping the kids there, because the last 2 years with Dr. Wilson, we've had a 95% attendance, 95% graduation rate with the kids that he's had us work with. And it has made a difference. So I guess what we really need to look at is really finding out, like you said, first of all, why the kids don't want to be there. And a lot of it is because they feel unwanted or they don't feel like they fit in. And we have to make a difference on that. So it is climate, school atmosphere. It makes a difference.
If there was one area that school systems, policymakers, individual schools and teachers could emphasize to get the most bang for the buck, what would that be? Why don't we start, Jane, we'll start over here and just go around the table.
There's so many things that you could focus on as the last and the most important thing. But as I feel the theme of this conversation, and I'm very much in line with it, it really is about understanding the child and seeing the child as an asset that our country cannot afford to waste. He's not a test score, he's a child. And really working with that child and knowing him and solving his problems, as Bob says, so that he can learn. If he needs to earn money to stay in school, figure out a way to do that. If he's homeless, figure a way to handle that. It's really doing that, and that's what it's going to take.
Robert?
I would say two things. I would say empowerment of students. Students in this day and age want to be a part of their education, want to be a part of their experience, and are invested when you actually include them in that. And I would also say this thing doesn't cost anything. It is for the adults to actually lead. When you see kids walking around and it's school time, you can engage them. Now, I'm not going to suggest that you demean them, you say anything derogatory, but you can say, hey, what school do you belong in? And you can develop a conversation, and then you can kind of push them forward. So even if you see them again, they'll know, okay, I just saw Mr. Murphy. I saw him last week. I don't want to see him again. Or they might even wave or engage you or whatever. I think we live in a very sterile environment where we only engage those that we know versus those that we don't know. And for many of us who have a lot to give, too much is given, much is expected. And it's our responsibility to kind of herd them back to where they need to be. So again, something free and then something that costs.
Pat?
Well, like I said again, I really think that we have to look at involvement for the students. We have to give them reasons to want to be there, reasons to change, and we have to have someone who's really sitting there listening to what they have to say. I'm very surprised in seeing how even high school counselors, the job has just changed. It used to be a time when if you had a problem, you could go to the counselor and sit and talk with them. But now it's all about academics. You know, you come to me about your class, come to me about your grades, but not about your problems. And a lot of the problems with the kids are beyond them because as grown as they look, they're still children. They're still children. So we need to really just take time, invest with programs that are really there for the children and helping them to navigate their way through all the pitfalls. And really, I love the fact that Baltimore City has gotten very involved with mentoring because it does make a difference because they don't get it at home.
Sabrina?
So I think in this conversation, collaboration is very important. It's just not the school system's role. It's just not the city government's responsibility, but it's going to take all of us and our collective efforts to make sure that our focus is that our young people are successful.
I would just add that there's really no mystery to solving the dropout crisis. We know which schools kids drop out from. We know why they drop out. We actually know who is likely to drop out absent good intervention for the next 3 or 4 or 5 graduating classes. So if we don't solve it, it's because we choose not to.
David?
I think using your data beyond just a test score, using all the data available to you to figure out the solutions, and finally setting clear expectations, as far as saying, based on relationships.
I think my colleagues have said a lot of the right things, but I do think that relationships are key. Relationships between students, relationships between adults and students in the buildings, and the relationships that the schools have with the surrounding community are definitely key. But I also do believe that we have a lot of information that some of us hold and not necessarily everyone knows. And so even understanding the pathway to disengagement, it's something that some people understand and other people don't know. So making sure that the whole community is truly educated about early warning indicators and understands their responsibility in that pathway to disengagement and knows what their responsibility is to stop a student from being disengaged, whether it's the parent or a teacher or a principal or a district leader. But everybody has a role to play in keeping kids in school.
A lot of great thinking around the table on student engagement and other topics, and just wanted to circle back to my own current focus on dropout recovery and expressing continued interest on the part of the National League of Cities in supporting Baltimore and other Maryland cities in making sure that the efforts to re-engage dropouts are at a scale that matches the number who are already out of school.
I actually want to piggyback off of that again in the dropout recovery efforts, but to make sure that when we work with students and families, we think about their individual needs and we make sure the students are in an environment, which goes back to what everybody's saying, in an environment that will allow them to be successful when they, not only before they leave, but also when they come back, that they're in an environment that allows them to have success and meets their needs, whatever diverse needs those are, flexible scheduling, daycare, whatever those needs are, we make sure that they have them met so the student can meet success.
I think specifically in urban environments, the school has to stand in the shoes of parent oftentimes. Parents' patriarchy is real and alive for urban centers, and it requires us to do more than we've ever done. And it feels like it's too much, but if we don't put the effort in up front, we won't get the results that we're seeking. And if we do put the effort in up front, it becomes an easy, wonderful job.
Rhonda?
And, you know, my piece is the parents. I think that as a parent of three, I just think that parents, you know, as I said before, are the foundation of the family, and family is the foundation of community. And as any parent, you want the best for your child. You have goals and dreams for them, but you just may not have the tools and resources to make that happen. So really engaging the entire, just not the parent, but the family. We talked about, someone said mentoring, but mentoring and helping the entire family be successful, and that is going to continue to move that child forward, parents that are truly involved.
Dr. Morgan, since you opened things up so well, we'll let you close it out.
Close them up. I think this is a problem we can solve if we have the will to do it. I think we've heard from these incredible people. We have a compendium of fantastic best practices all around this table. And if we have the will to really fix this problem in the state of Maryland, these best practices need to be put on the table. They need to be codified. They need to be spread throughout the state, and they need to be resourced. One thing I learned as a superintendent, what gets resourced gets done. What gets noticed gets accomplished. And if we could solve the problem of graduation and dropout in a county like Washington County, which at the time I arrived there was a very high poverty school system, where going to college was not a goal, where graduating from high school was not. We had many, many kids who were graduating high school, were the first ones in their family to graduate. But we put a lot of resources toward this. And we went from a 78% graduation rate to currently, I think Washington County just posted 92% in 2012. If it can be done there, it can be done anywhere. And this is what I was trying to say about state policies. Where the money flows and where the support flows is extremely important. We skirted around the money, but I do think we have to be more targeted in our approach to this. All of you mentioned fantastic initiatives that need to be resourced and not only need to be continued, but need to be expanded and need to be spread to other places. And I'm hoping that in the future, these are some of the things we might look at in order to solve this problem. The fact remains that Maryland has hovered around a 79, 80% rate, Bob, for years. For years. We have just inched up. And maybe when we post the new graduation rates, we'll be at 82%. I don't know. I'm not hopeful because we haven't made this in the state a major initiative, a major goal. It's something that can be solved. It can happen. There's no reason why Maryland shouldn't be at 90%. One of the keys is dropout recovery, very much so. Addressing the individual student, working with the parents, all this together, if we resource these best practices, we can have it happen. But the state has to say, this is our top priority, because if we lose 20,600 kids a year, that's going to continue to compromise our economy and compromise our society and our communities in Maryland.
Well, thank you all for coming. This was a terrific panel. Thanks for jumping in, making the conversation go. And in conclusion, give yourselves a hand. This was well done.
This program is part of American Graduate. Let's make it happen. A public media initiative made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.